Long before the pyramids of Giza, before the glory of pharaohs like Ramses II or Tutankhamun, before the rise of Kush or Aksum, there was Kerma. Deep in the Nile Valley, in what is now northern Sudan, a civilization flourished that was among the earliest urban, organized, and powerful states in all of Black Africa. The kingdom of Kerma dominated the region from roughly 2500 BCE to 1500 BCE, making it contemporary with the Great Old and Middle Kingdoms of Egypt. Yet Kerma was not merely a copy of Egyptian civilization. It was a distinct, indigenous African culture with its own architecture, its own religious practices, its own political organization, and its own artistic traditions. For much of history, Kerma was overlooked. Egypt dominated the scholarly imagination of the ancient world. The great discoveries of the 19th and 20th centuries focused on the Valley of the Kings, the temples of Luxor, and the sands of Giza. Nubia, the land south of Egypt, was treated as an afterthought, a source of gold and slaves, a peripheral region that mattered only in relation to Egypt. But decades of archaeological work, particularly by Swiss and American teams, have revealed a very different picture. Far from being a peripheral backwater, Kerma was a major power in its own right. It built monumental architecture, including the largest mud brick structure in the ancient world. It developed a sophisticated economy based on trade, animal husbandry, and craftsmanship. It had a powerful army that rivaled that of Egypt. It buried its kings in massive tumuli, surrounded by hundreds of sacrificed retainers. It created exquisite pottery, jewelry, and furniture. This course will take you deep into the world of Kerma. We will explore its origins, its rise to power, its culture and society, its relationship with Egypt, its eventual decline, and its rediscovery by modern archaeology. You will learn that the first civilization of Black Africa was not a footnote in Egyptian history, but a chapter in its own right. You will understand why Kerma matters for all Africans today, as a testament to the sophisticated civilizations that flourished on the continent long before European contact. To understand Kerma, we must first understand Nubia. Nubia is the region along the Nile River from Aswan in southern Egypt to Khartoum in central Sudan. It is a land of dramatic contrasts. In the north, near Egypt, the Nile flows through narrow gorges of sandstone and granite. Further south, the river widens into the fertile Dormola Reach, where the land is green and the floodplain is rich. This was the heartland of Kerma. The name Nubia itself is ancient. It may derive from the Egyptian word nub, meaning gold, and indeed, Nubia was famous for its gold mines. But Nubia was far more than a source of gold. It was a crossroads of cultures, a meeting point between Africa and the Mediterranean, a corridor through which goods, ideas, and peoples traveled. The earliest inhabitants of Nubia were pastoralists, who herded cattle in the savannas that stretched along the Nile. As the climate of the Sahara became drier after 5000 BCE, these populations concentrated more densely along the river. They began to cultivate crops, domesticate animals, and develop settled communities. By the late 4th millennium BCE, a distinct Nubian culture had emerged, known to archaeologists as the A-group culture. The A-group people built villages, traded with Egypt, and buried their dead in simple graves with pottery and personal ornaments. However, around 3000 BCE, the A-group culture declined, likely due to political consolidation in Egypt and increasing pressure from the north. For about 500 years, the archaeological record of Nubia is sparse. But around 2500 BCE, something remarkable happened. A new culture emerged, far more sophisticated and powerful than anything that had come before. This was the Kerma culture, named after the modern town of Kerma in northern Sudan, where its capital city was located. The rise of Kerma coincided with a period of relative weakness in Egypt. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, which had built the Great Pyramids, went into decline around 2200 BCE, leading to a period of political fragmentation known as the First Intermediate Period. This created an opportunity for Nubian powers to assert themselves. Kerma seized that opportunity. The capital city of Kerma was located at the heart of the Dormola Reach, on the eastern bank of the Nile. It was an ideal location for several reasons. First, the surrounding land was fertile, allowing for abundant agriculture. Second, the Nile provided a transportation route for trade and communication. Third, Kerma was at the crossroads of trade routes connecting Egypt to the south and the Red Sea to the west. Fourth, the region was rich in gold, copper, and other valuable resources. The city grew rapidly. By 2000 BCE, it had become one of the largest urban centers in Africa. The site of Kerma, as excavated by archaeologists, covers an area of over 40 hectares. It contained a massive palace, a temple complex, residential neighborhoods, industrial workshops, and vast cemeteries. The population of Kerma at its peak is estimated at 10 to 20,000 people, making it a true city by the standards of the ancient world. The most extraordinary structure at Kerma is known as the Defufa, a massive mud brick building that dominates the archaeological site. The Defufa is a rectangular structure measuring approximately 50 meters on each side and originally reaching a height of about 18 meters. It is the largest known mud brick building from the ancient world. The Defufa is not a pyramid, though it is sometimes compared to one. It is a unique architectural form, specific to the Kerma culture. The word Defufa comes from the Nubian language and may mean mound or pile. But the building is no mere pile. It was carefully constructed with walls up to 5 meters thick at their base, tapering as they rise. The interior of the Defufa consists of a complex of corridors, chambers, and staircases. Archaeologists believe it served multiple functions. It was likely a temple for religious ceremonies, a palace for the king, and an administrative center for the state, a combination of functions common in ancient Near Eastern and African cities. The Defufa was not just a building, it was a statement. It proclaimed the power and wealth of the kingdom of Kerma to all who approached the city. It was visible from kilometers away, rising above the flat plain of the Dormola Reach. Its massive scale required thousands of workers, sophisticated engineering, and centralized organization. To build the Defufa, Kerma's rulers had to mobilize labor on an unprecedented scale in the region. The construction techniques were advanced for their time. The bricks were made from Nile mud mixed with straw, formed in wooden molds, and dried in the sun. This same technique would be used in West Africa for the great mosques of Djenné and Timbuktu millennia later, suggesting a continuity of African building traditions. The Defufa was not the only monumental structure at Kerma. There were at least 2 other Defufas, one of which, known as the Eastern Defufa, was a large circular structure that may have been a watchtower or a defensive fortification. The entire city was surrounded by a massive defensive wall, also made of mud brick, suggesting that Kerma faced military threats, and had a strong centralized state capable of organizing large-scale public works. The presence of such monumental architecture at Kerma is significant for several reasons. First, it demonstrates that the Kerma civilization was capable of complex organization and centralized planning. Second, it shows that Kerma had a powerful elite that could command labor and resources. Third, it indicates that Kerma had a sophisticated religious system that justified and legitimized the power of the king. Fourth, it proves that indigenous African civilizations could produce monumental architecture independently of Egyptian influence. The Defufa was not borrowed from Egypt. It was a native Nubian creation. Kerma was a highly stratified society. At the top was the king, who held political, military, and religious authority. The king was likely considered a divine or semi-divine figure, similar to the pharaoh in Egypt, though the precise nature of Kerma kingship is still being studied. Below the king was a class of nobles, priests, military commanders, and administrators. These elites lived in large houses within the city, wore fine clothing and jewelry, and were buried in elaborate tombs with rich grave goods. The craftsmanship at Kerma reached extraordinary levels. Excavations have uncovered exquisite gold and silver jewelry, including earrings, bracelets, necklaces, and rings. Kerma artisans worked with precious metals, ivory, ebony, and semi-precious stones. They produced furniture inlaid with ivory and ebony, beds, stools, and headrests. The quality of Kerma craftsmanship rivaled that of contemporary Egypt and was in many ways distinctive. Kerma pottery is particularly famous. It is thin-walled, elegantly shaped, and often decorated with geometric patterns in black and red. The pottery was made without a potter's wheel, using a coil technique that required great skill. The firing process created a distinctive black-topped red ware that is instantly recognizable to archaeologists. This pottery was not just functional. It was a high-value trade item that has been found as far away as Egypt and the Red Sea region. The lower classes in Kerma consisted of farmers, herders, fishermen, craftsmen, and laborers. They lived in smaller houses, ate simpler food, and were buried in modest graves. But even among the common people, there was evidence of relative prosperity. The agricultural base of Kerma was strong. The fertile floodplain of the Dongola Reach, combined with irrigation techniques, produced abundant crops of barley, wheat, lentils, and dates. Cattle, sheep, and goats were raised for meat, milk, and hides. The Nile provided fish and waterfowl. This agricultural wealth supported the urban population and freed a portion of society to specialize in crafts, trade, and administration. One of the most distinctive features of Kerma society was the practice of retainer sacrifice. When a king or high-ranking noble died, dozens or even hundreds of his retainers were killed and buried with him, so they could serve him in the afterlife. The royal cemetery at Kerma contains massive tumuli, earthen mounds covering burial chambers, surrounded by hundreds of smaller graves. These retainers appear to have been killed at the time of the burial, likely by poison or strangulation. The scale of retainer sacrifice at Kerma is unequaled in the ancient world except for the royal tombs of Ur in Mesopotamia. One tumulus at Kerma, dating to about 1700 BCE, is over 90 meters in diameter, and was surrounded by the graves of over 400 sacrificed retainers. This practice testifies to the absolute power of the Kerma kings. It also reflects a worldview in which the king's authority extended beyond death. The king remained a ruler in the afterlife, and his servants had a duty to accompany him there. The role of women in Kerma society is also notable. Women of the elite class were buried with rich grave goods, suggesting they held high status. Some graves contain ceremonial axes and other symbols of authority, indicating that women may have held positions of political or religious power. The Queen Mother, or Candace, was an important figure in later Nubian civilizations, and it is possible that this tradition had its roots in Kerma. The relationship between Kerma and Egypt was one of the most significant geopolitical dynamics of the ancient world. For centuries, these two great civilizations coexisted along the Nile, trading, competing, and occasionally fighting. The relationship was complex and evolved over time. During the earliest phase of Kerma's history, around 2500 to 2200 BCE, Egypt was in its Old Kingdom period, building pyramids and extending its power southward. The Egyptians conducted military campaigns into Nubia, seeking to control trade routes and secure access to gold, ivory, ebony, ostrich feathers, leopard skins, and slaves, all highly prized commodities. They established fortified settlements at the Second Cataract of the Nile, which served as their southern frontier. The fortress of Buhan, one of the most impressive of these structures, covered an area of about 150 meters by 130 meters, with walls 5 meters thick and 10 meters high. It was designed to house a garrison of several hundred soldiers, and to project Egyptian power deep into Nubian territory. However, even during this period of Egyptian expansion, Kerma was not conquered. The kings of Kerma maintained their independence, and the region of the Dormola Reach remained outside Egyptian control. Trade between the two civilizations flourished. Egyptian goods found at Kerma include alabaster vessels, faience beads, scarabs, amulets, and even a statue of an Egyptian official named Hikab. Kerma goods found in Egypt include ivory, ebony, incense, and the distinctive Kerma black-topped red pottery. This trade was not one-sided. Kerma was a trading partner, not a vassal. Around 2200 BCE, the Old Kingdom of Egypt collapsed, leading to the First Intermediate Period. Egypt was divided between competing dynasties. There was no central authority to maintain the fortresses or patrol the southern border. This was Kerma's opportunity. Freed from the threat of Egyptian invasion, Kerma expanded its territory northward with remarkable speed. The Kerma kings established their control over the Second Cataract region, occupying the fortresses that the Egyptians had built. They controlled the trade routes and the gold mines. They grew rich and powerful. Kerma reached its greatest extent during this period, controlling a territory that stretched from the Third Cataract in the south to the First Cataract at Aswan in the north. This was an empire of perhaps 1,000 kilometers along the Nile, an area larger than many contemporary kingdoms in the Near East. Egypt, meanwhile, was divided and weak, its once great civilization reduced to squabbling regional lordships. When Egypt was reunified under the Middle Kingdom around 2050 BCE, the pharaohs of the 12th dynasty turned their attention back to Nubia with a vengeance. The great pharaohs, Amenemhat I, Senusret I, and Senusret III, launched a systematic campaign to reconquer Nubia. Senusret III, in particular, was a military genius. He led 4 major campaigns into Nubia, pushing the Egyptian frontier to the Second Cataract and beyond. He built a chain of massive fortresses along the Second Cataract, including the famous fortresses of Buhan, Semna, Qumma, Shalfak, Askat, and Magissa. These fortresses were engineering marvels. Buhan had a wall 5 meters thick and 10 meters high, with a moat 8 meters wide, reinforced by bastions every 5 meters. Semna was built on a rocky outcrop commanding a narrow gorge of the Nile, making it virtually impregnable. The fortresses were equipped with storehouses, workshops, wells, and barracks. They were designed to withstand prolonged sieges, and to project Egyptian power deep into Nubian territory. The Egyptian inscriptions at the fortresses are revealing. One inscription at the Semna fortress records the pharaoh's decree, the southern frontier, made by the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Senusret III, to prevent any Nubian from passing it by water or land, except a Nubian who comes to trade in the fortress. Another inscription records Senusret's boast, "I have made my boundary more southward than my fathers. I have added more than what was bequeathed to me." The fortresses effectively blocked Kerma's expansion northward for about 2 centuries. Tensions were high, and periodic military clashes occurred. The writings of Egyptian officials from this period describe the people of Kerma as wretched Kush, and warn of their military capabilities. The fact that the Egyptians had to build such extensive fortifications suggests that they genuinely feared Kerma. And with good reason. Kerma was not a passive victim of Egyptian aggression. It was a formidable military power in its own right. Kerma warriors were armed with bronze swords, spears, and bows. The Kerma bow was a powerful composite weapon made of wood, horn, and sinew, similar to the Egyptian bow but often larger. Kerma also had chariots, likely introduced from the Near East via trade routes across the Red Sea. The Kerma army was large, well-organized, and experienced in desert warfare. The balance of power shifted again around 1700 BCE, when Egypt entered the Second Intermediate Period. The Hyksos, a Semitic people from Asia, invaded Egypt and established their rule over the north. The Egyptian pharaohs of the south, of the 17th dynasty, lost control of Nubia. They could no longer maintain the fortresses. Kerma took full advantage. The Kerma kings pushed northward, destroyed the Egyptian fortresses, and established their dominance over much of Nubia. They formed alliances with the Hyksos, sending embassies and gifts to the Asiatic rulers of northern Egypt. Pottery from Kerma has been found as far north as Tel El Dabeh, the Hyksos' capital in the Nile Delta, evidence of diplomatic and commercial ties. This period, known as the Classic Kerma period, was the height of Kerma's power and prosperity. The largest royal tumuli were built, the most spectacular grave goods were buried, and the defufa reached its final form. Kerma seemed poised to become the dominant power in the entire Nile Valley, a Nubian empire that might have rewritten the history of the ancient world. The decline of Kerma was as dramatic as its rise. The agent of its destruction was the Egyptian New Kingdom, one of the most powerful and expansionist phases of Egyptian history. When the Egyptian pharaoh Ahmose I expelled the Hyksos and reunited Egypt around 1550 BCE, he launched immediate campaigns to reassert Egyptian control over Nubia. But it was his successors, particularly Thutmose I and Thutmose III, who would deliver the fatal blow to Kerma. Thutmose I, reigned circa 1506 to 1493 BCE, led a massive military expedition into Nubia. His army, armed with bronze weapons and horse-drawn chariots, advanced deep into Kerma territory. At the Third Cataract, near the border of Kerma's heartland, a great battle was fought. The Egyptian army, experienced from the wars against the Hyksos, defeated the Kerma forces. Thutmose I boasted that he had personally killed the Kerma king and hung his body from the prow of his ship. Whether this is propaganda or literal truth is debated, but the outcome was clear: Kerma was defeated. The Egyptians did not stop at defeating Kerma. They systematically dismantled the kingdom. The great city of Kerma was sacked and burned. The royal tombs were looted. The population was dispersed or enslaved. The Egyptian fortresses, which had been destroyed in the Second Intermediate Period, were rebuilt and expanded. Egypt now controlled the Nile all the way to the Fourth Cataract, deeper into Nubia than ever before. Kerma's territory was absorbed into the Egyptian Empire. The region was administered by a viceroy known as the King's Son of Kush, who ruled from the city of Napata. Nubia became a crucial source of wealth for the Egyptian New Kingdom. The gold mines of Nubia financed the construction of the great temples of Karnak and Luxor. Nubian soldiers served in the Egyptian army, earning a reputation as fierce warriors. Nubian administrators rose to high positions in the Egyptian government. But the fall of Kerma did not mean the end of Nubian civilization. The cultural traditions of Kerma survived, transformed by Egyptian influence, and eventually re-emerged in the Kingdom of Kush. The later Nubian kings of Napata, who conquered Egypt itself in the 8th century BCE and ruled as the 25th dynasty, were the cultural and political heirs of Kerma. The great pharaohs of the 25th dynasty, such as Piya, Shabaka, and Taharqa, were Nubians who worshipped Egyptian gods, wrote in Egyptian hieroglyphs, and built pyramids in the Nubian style. But they also preserved distinctive Nubian practices, including the importance of the Queen Mother, the use of the Nubian language, and the veneration of specifically Nubian deities. The continuity between Kerma and Kush is a reminder that civilizations do not simply disappear. They are transformed, absorbed, and reborn in new forms. For millennia, Kerma was lost to history. The ancient Egyptians recorded their wars with Kush, but the details were fragmentary. Greek and Roman historians, such as Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus, wrote about Nubia and its wonders, but their accounts were often based on hearsay. By the time European explorers began to travel up the Nile in the 19th century, the great city of Kerma was buried under layers of sand and silt. The first European to visit the site of Kerma was the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt in 1813. Burckhardt, who also discovered the temples of Abu Simbel and the city of Petra, noted the ruins at Kerma, but did not recognize their significance. He assumed they were the remains of a Roman settlement. It was not until the early 20th century that serious archaeological work began at Kerma. In 1913, the American archaeologist George Reisner, working for Harvard University and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, conducted the first scientific excavations at the site. Reisner was one of the most brilliant archaeologists of his generation. He had already made major discoveries in Egypt and Nubia, including the tomb of Queen Hetepheres, the mother of the pyramid builder Khufu. When Reisner began digging at Kerma, he was astonished by what he found. He uncovered the massive defufa, the royal tumuli, and thousands of graves. He recovered exquisite pottery, jewelry, furniture, and weapons. He realized immediately that Kerma was not a minor outpost, but a major civilization. Reisner dated Kerma to approximately 2000 to 1600 BCE, making it contemporary with the Egyptian Middle Kingdom and Second Intermediate Period. However, Reisner made a fundamental error. He assumed that Kerma was an Egyptian colony or trading post, not an independent Nubian kingdom. He believed that the defufa was a fortress built by Egyptians, and that the rich graves were those of Egyptian administrators and their Nubian wives. This interpretation reflected the racial biases of Reisner's time. Like many early 20th century scholars, Reisner could not imagine that black Africans had built a complex urban civilization independently. He assumed that any sign of sophistication in Africa must have come from outside, particularly from Egypt or the Middle East. It took decades for archaeologists to correct Reisner's interpretation. The work of Swiss archaeologist Charles Bonnet, who began excavating Kerma in the 1970s, was particularly important. Bonnet's excavations revealed the true scale and sophistication of Kerma. He uncovered the city's residential neighborhoods, industrial workshops, and fortifications. He proved that Kerma was a completely indigenous Nubian civilization, not an Egyptian colony. Bonnet's most spectacular discovery came in 2003, when his team uncovered 7 life-size statues of Nubian kings at the site of Dukigel, near Kerma. The statues, which date to about 1500 BCE, are made of granite and depict the kings with distinctly African features, broad noses, full lips, and braided hair. They are among the oldest monumental royal statues found in sub-Saharan Africa. The controversy over Kerma's origins is a case study in how racial bias can distort archaeological interpretation. For generations, scholars assumed that any advanced civilization in Africa must have had outside influences. Kerma, like Great Zimbabwe, like the Kingdom of Benin, was dismissed as a derivative culture. Only when African archaeologists and their allies insisted on re-examining the evidence was the truth revealed. Kerma was an indigenous African creation, a civilization built by black Africans for their own purposes. Today, Kerma is recognized as one of the most important archaeological sites in Africa. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The artifacts from Kerma are displayed in museums in Khartoum, Geneva, and Boston. And the site continues to yield new discoveries. Each excavation season brings new insights into this remarkable civilization. The Kingdom of Kerma matters for reasons that go far beyond historical curiosity. It matters for our understanding of African civilization, for the identity of modern Africans, and for the ongoing struggle to decolonize knowledge about the continent. First, Kerma demonstrates that complex urban civilization in Africa was not limited to Egypt. For too long, the narrative of African history has been dominated by Egypt, as if the rest of the continent was a blank space waiting for civilization to arrive from the north. Kerma shows that the peoples of the Upper Nile were building cities, states, and monuments at the same time that the pyramids were being constructed. They were not passive recipients of Egyptian culture, but active creators of their own civilization. Second, Kerma reveals the depth of cultural and economic connections across ancient Africa. Kerma was not isolated. It traded with Egypt, with the Red Sea region, and likely with the savanna regions to the south and west. The Kerma culture was part of a network of African civilizations that included the cattle cultures of the Sahara, the trading cities of the Red Sea, and the emerging states of the Ethiopian highlands. Africa was connected long before the arrival of Europeans. Third, Kerma challenges the Eurocentric framework that has dominated the study of the ancient world. When we study ancient history in school, we learn about the civilizations of the Mediterranean, the Near East, and Asia. Africa, apart from Egypt, is largely absent. Kerma, along with civilizations like Nok, Aksum, Ghana, Mali, and Great Zimbabwe, forces us to expand our definition of the ancient world to include the achievements of Black Africans. Fourth, Kerma provides a source of pride and identity for modern Nubians and all Africans of the diaspora. The Nubian people, who still inhabit the region from Aswan to Khartoum, are the descendants of the Kerma civilization. Their language, culture, and traditions contain echoes of their ancient ancestors. For Nubians who have been marginalized in both Egypt and Sudan, the rediscovery of Kerma is a powerful affirmation of their heritage. For African Americans and Afro-Caribbeans seeking to reconnect with their ancestral past, Kerma is a reminder that the African continent was home to civilizations of extraordinary sophistication long before the transatlantic slave trade. Finally, Kerma is a testament to the resilience of African culture. Despite centuries of Egyptian domination, followed by Greek, Roman, Arab, Turkish, and European influence, the Nubian identity has survived. The people of the Nile Valley have maintained their languages, their customs, and their connection to their ancient past. Kerma is not just a ruin. It is a living legacy. The full extent of the Kerma civilization is still being discovered, but several key sites and artifacts deserve special attention. The main site at Kerma, modern Tel Kerma, includes the Western Defufa, the Great Temple or Palace, the Eastern Defufa, a circular structure of uncertain function, the residential quarter, the industrial quarter, and the Royal Cemetery with its massive tumuli. The Royal Cemetery contains the largest tumuli, some reaching over 90 meters in diameter. The most famous tumulus, known as Tumulus KX, was excavated by Charles Bonnet and found to contain the remains of a king surrounded by hundreds of sacrificed retainers, and spectacular grave goods including gold jewelry, bronze weapons, and ivory furniture. The statues of Duki Gel, found 3 kilometers from the main Kerma site, are among the most important artifacts of ancient Nubia. These 7 granite statues, each about 2 meters tall, depict Nubian kings standing with their arms crossed over their chests, holding symbols of royal authority. Their faces are distinctly African, and their headdresses incorporate the ram's horns of the Nubian god Amun. They date to the period when Kerma was at war with the Egyptian New Kingdom, and they may represent kings who resisted the Egyptian invasion. The Kerma pottery is found throughout the Nile Valley. The black-topped red ware, with its thin walls and geometric decorations, is one of the most distinctive pottery traditions of the ancient world. Each pot was handmade, a testament to the skill of Kerma potters. The pottery was not only functional, but also a medium for artistic expression. The Kerma bronze industry was also highly developed. Bronze arrowheads, spearheads, daggers, and axes have been found in large quantities. Kerma metallurgists were skilled at casting and working bronze, and their weapons were highly sought after. The fact that Kerma had a developed bronze industry places it among the technologically advanced civilizations of its time. Beyond Kerma itself, several other sites reveal the extent of the Kerma civilization. The site of Kowa, further south along the Nile, contains evidence of Kerma settlement and later Egyptian occupation. The site of Sisibi, in modern Sudan, was a Kerma stronghold. The fortress of Buhan, originally Egyptian, was occupied by Kerma forces during the Second Intermediate Period. The island of Sai, in the Nile, contains Kerma burials and settlement remains. These sites paint a picture of a civilization that was not confined to a single city, but spanned a wide territory. Kerma was a regional power with multiple urban centers, a network of fortifications, and a complex economic system. The artifacts of Kerma are now scattered across the world. The largest collections are in the Sudan National Museum in Khartoum, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and the Musée d'Art et d'Histoire in Geneva. These museums hold the material legacy of a civilization that was once the dominant power in the Nile Valley. Each artifact, whether it is a simple pot or a golden necklace, tells a story of a people who built, traded, fought, worshipped, and created. To study these artifacts is to hear the voices of ancient Nubians speaking across the millennia. They remind us that the history of Africa is not a story of darkness, but of light, the light of civilization that shone on the banks of the Nile 35 centuries ago.